Back on again, talking about the curse of knowledge here and Steven Pinker. You've now read 3 articles on possibly a rather obscure topic, and that means that you may be the subject matter expert within a 50-mile radius of where you now sit. Understand that your knowledge becomes the enemy of your reader's comfort, because you're talking about things that you've internalized and you understand, and you may not be realizing that you're talking about them and dealing with them at a level that your reader's not at. So you have to go through these things after you've written them and look at them from the point of view of relative ignorance and say, would somebody who's not familiar with these exotic topics know what this stuff is? So yeah, there are some concepts that we can generally gather that people know. At this point, most people know what quantitative easing was. But even that, I might, in a paper, generally explain. I don't have to explain what a Democrat is or a Republican is necessarily, but I might have to explain, for instance, what Bastille Day really was about, or I mean, think about it this way, for example, right? Like the 4th of July. If I'm writing for an American audience, I don't have to explain that. But if I'm writing about, May Day, right, the Russian Revolution, I might have to explain that to an American audience because most Americans are not completely up on their Russian history, for example. So be aware of the curse of knowledge. It comes down to more than just dates and events. It can be about meta concepts and all kinds of things that we deal in. So basically you have to go back and edit your own writing and ask yourself always, would a writer with a general base of knowledge, not a highly specialized base of knowledge like my own, be able to get through this, again, without having to go to Wikipedia, without having to search something on the free web, without having to go look at the article itself to determine what's going on in here. Paper F, interesting. I've had this now with 2 or 3 papers this semester. Every semester it seems to me like a new problem crops up that I couldn't have predicted, and I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just coincidental, but people are having trouble with verses this semester. If you're writing a court opinion name, so Brown versus Board of Education, right? Brown v. period Board of Education, just a V. If you were abbreviating verses, right, Frazier, Ali versus Frazier, that's VS with a period, but we wouldn't hyphenate like that in academic writing like we're doing here. You would actually write verses out. So the occasions where you would use a VS period in this course are limited. You're just going to want to write out verses. So anyway, that was odd that I've had 2 papers at least, maybe 3, which have had some issue around that particular problem. Students often have a problem with the V in court opinion names, and it is just a V with a period. They tend to drop the period, or they use VS with a period, which is wrong. But other than that one, I'm starting to see it crop up in some other places, and that's unusual. Maybe it's a thing. Paper identified as paper G, and again, it'll be better when I get everyone's consent. I can start to actually anonymize these and then use the actual text in these presentations. I want you to work hard to give your paper, to give anything you write every possible chance to be taken seriously by the reader. So you may, the idea is after you finish this class, you're going to graduate from UMass and you're going to go work somewhere, and someone's going to read what you write. Or even if you work for yourself, you're going to have to put out work product, and people, customers, are going to read your writing, and they're going to make a choice as to whether or not to take this person seriously. I work under a theory that small things can make a big difference. And if you do all the small things right, it makes your writing look better, it makes you look stronger on the page. One thing I kind of harp on, and I understand that some people don't get it, but I'm serious about it, is writing out whole counting numbers under 100, anything from 1 to 99. Now there are some situations where you're going to use numbers, right? If it's page 3, like P.3, use the 3. If we're talking about something that happened in the year 6 in the current era, we use 6, right? For dates, for page numbers, stuff like that. Yeah, we use the actual Arabic numeral. But in the text, right, here I have a student who writes about Authors creating a scale with 16 issues, and they use the Arabic numerals 1-6 for 16. I want that written out as 16, with letters. And likewise, don't use a percent sign. Spell out percent. All throughout here, there's a scored each participant on a scale, plus 16 to minus 16. Again, positive 16 written out to negative 16 written out. It makes your writing look more serious. It makes it look better on the page. And then it has a snowballing effect in terms of how seriously you get taken as a writer by the people reading your writing. We have in here 38 of the 50 states. Write it out, 38 and 50. Paper H, reliant throughout this whole paper on the term factors. Now, Garner, again, if you're not reading Garner, you're not growing as a writer around here. Garner categorizes factor and words similar to it, compound, dilemma, veracity. These are all what he calls slipshod extensions, denote the mistaken stretching of a word beyond its accepted meanings, the mistake lying in a misunderstanding of the true sense. And then he quotes this guy, H.W. Fowler, who was kind of the Garner of a previous generation, saying, when some accident gives currency among the uneducated to words of learned origin, and the more they are isolated or have fewer relatives in the vernacular. That's what he's talking about as a slipshod extension. So when you're using factor all the time, it becomes meaningless. I was giving a job interview to a guy I remember at a company I used to work with, and he finished every sentence describing his previous work experience with "and whatnot." So we did this and this and this, and I learned how to, manage this kind of crisis and whatnot. It became like a meaningless extension of every sentence. It was like a tick, and I want to tell him and just say, in future interviews, because you're not working here, stop it, right? In your writing, when you're using factors frequently and generally, it doesn't tell your reader anything. Economic factors. What isn't an economic factor, really? If I go and buy a pair of shoes this afternoon, that's an economic factor. I don't think that's what the authors of the main article were talking about. You need to be more specific. You need to draw in detail at that point. Work. Writing is work, and part of the work is not being sloppy and not being careless, and part of it is not being too general. Calling something a factor is just waving a hand at it. It doesn't tell the reader anything about it. Economic factors, it's just not going to be, it's not strong writing. Now, you can probably find an example of some time in my life when I've done it, and I was wrong. You can probably find an example of somebody who's a good writer who does it occasionally. They're wrong too. You really want to work to bring in the detail that makes what you're writing worth the time of the reader to finish. And the way to do that, the way to strengthen your writing in this case, is not to rely on these slipshod extensions. They're just, they may make for a tidy short sentence, but they don't add any knowledge that the reader needs moving forward. Anyway, those are my reviews of the various forms of paper. It's actually stretched out into 3 videos today, which is fine. I'll post all these, and we'll go on to the next step.